ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Selland, and welcome to The Converging Zone. Today, our guest is Gaylon Ross. He's the author of The Elite Serial Killers of Lincoln, JFK, RFK, and MLK. And he's if you've had a chance to watch our first two episodes, he's filling in the missing components to the murders of John F. Kennedy. And we also want to talk today about the other two. I think there's a lot to talk about. Welcome, Gaylon Ross.
My pleasure.
How you doing there, pal?
Great to be with you.
Well, let's fill in the holes. In my mind, I'm going through the whys.
Very important subject. Why was he killed? And the number one reason he was killed is because he created money.
He created money.
He signed Executive Order 11110 instructing the Treasury Department to print $4.6 billion in silver certificates that were redeemable in silver at any national bank.
Who signed that?
Kennedy.
Kennedy did.
That was in May of '63.
So a silver certificate is not printed by
It's not from the Federal Reserve. And it's competition with the Federal Reserve. And
with the Federal Reserve, no.
And the international bankers own or control all central banks, including the U.S. Federal Reserve.
Right.
And so they could not stand to have anyone competing with them or against them in the creation of money and credit. John J. McCloy was an agent of the Rothschilds, and Rothschilds were headed up most of the international banks. And so he represented the Rothschilds as agent at this Clinton-Murchison meeting.
Okay.
And he's also represented the international bankers on the Warren Commission as one of the sitting members of the Warren Commission.
Oh, okay. McCloy was on the Warren Commission.
John J. McCloy.
Well, let's talk about the Warren Commission real quick, because that's always been a mystery to me. Allen Dulles was sitting on it, right?
He was fired by John Kennedy because of the failed Bay of Pigs fiasco.
Why would they invite him back to be in the Warren Commission? Is that kind of like...
Johnson named the people on the Warren Commission.
So that was kind of like the coup has been complete.
He loaded the jury.
I want to get by just with your filing your report.
I think it would be very, very bad to have a rash of investigations on
Well,
this
the
thing.
only way we can stop them is probably to appoint a high-level one to evaluate your report.
Yeah.
And put somebody that's pretty good on it from that I could select out of the government and tell the House and Senate not to go ahead with the investigation.
Who else was on there that we should be leery of?
A fellow named Warren, he called him up and said, I'm setting up a commission and I want you to head it up. And so Warren said, no, I don't really want to do that. And he says, well, this is not a request. You need to be on that commission. Johnson made him do it.
Really?
You just get ready to do this, and you're my man on there, and period.
Announced it, I would absolutely...
No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. No, I told Warren. Warren told me he wouldn't do it under any circumstances. Didn't think Supreme Court justice ought to go on it. He wouldn't have anything to do with it. He said a man that criticized this fellow that went on the Nuremberg trial, Jackson. He told me what he thought about Goldberg. He thought he's terrible. He's arbitrator.
It gives the Warren Commission great credibility by having the head of the
Supreme Court
sure. Setting it up. And so it had to be all facts because you had the Supreme Court guy heading it up.
I'm trying to think if there's anything I've left out. I mean, help me out. If there's anything that...
Yeah, we need to cover the death of Henry Marshall. So Bobby Kennedy found out that there may be some connection between cotton allotments and Billy Saul Estes and Lyndon Johnson. So he had Henry Marshall start investigating. Henry found out that there were 3,200 acres of cotton allotments bought by Billy Saul, and this was supposed to be illegal. So he reported that back, and Johnson got word of it, and so he called Cliff Carter and told him, get Mac Wallace down to Hearn and take care of this problem. Mac Wallace showed up in Hearn and went to the service station and filled up with gas, and he asked the service station attendant where Henry Marshall lived. So Mac went over there and parked just down the street and waited, and Henry Marshall came out of his house. So Mac followed him, and when he got in the secluded area in the ranch, Mac blew his horn, and so Henry stopped. And Mac got out and had a wrench behind his back, and he walked up and opened the door of the cab of the truck and hit Henry Marshall on the head, knocked him out. And Henry had a .22 bolt-action rifle in his gun rack behind the seat. So Mac Wallace took the rifle and shot Henry Marshall 5 times in the body.
Really?
Henry Marshall's wife got concerned that he didn't show up. So she called a friend and said, would you go out to the ranch and look for Henry? He didn't show up. So the friend went out and found it, and he immediately called the sheriff, and the sheriff showed up and looked the situation over, and he filed a report, death by suicide. Now you got to reach out there like that and pull the trigger and then cock it and pull the trigger again. And
So he shot himself 5 times.
the sheriff said he shot himself 5 times, and it was the cause of death was suicide.
Was that sheriff reelected the next
Well,
term?
the sheriff knew what was going on, and he knew.
That's unbelievable.
So now Clint Peoples interviewed Billy Saul in prison and said, we've got this problem in Hearn where they've declared that Henry Marshall died of suicide. And so Billy Saul said, oh, that's a bunch of crap. And so he agreed to go to the grand jury hearing Clint Peoples and Billy Saul Estes and the grand jury, and Billy Saul, under immunity from prosecution, said that he had a tape of a meeting where Lyndon Johnson, Cliff Carter, and Mac Wallace and himself were involved, and where Johnson had told Mac Wallace to kill Henry Marshall. They changed the cause of death from suicide to homicide. But by then, Johnson and Mac Wallace both were dead, so there was nobody to charge, so they closed the case.
So Mac Wallace really was kind of a henchman for...
He killed at least 16 people in the state of Texas for Lyndon Johnson,
Wow.
including Johnson's own sister.
Yeah.
That's really something.
How does Bobby Kennedy fit into this? Because you have him. He's right here. He's on your book.
Yeah, Bobby was running for president. Bobby tried to get J. Edgar Hoover to investigate his brother's killing. Hoover was involved in the killing, so why would he investigate the killing?
Exactly.
He couldn't get Hoover to investigate it, so the only way he could get to the bottom of it was become president, fire Hoover, and
Right.
put someone in charge that would actually investigate it. That's the reason he ran for president.
Who has the most to lose if Bobby Kennedy becomes president?
Well, obviously Johnson, Hoover, and all the people involved in that secret meeting.
If what you're saying is true, Bobby Kennedy can't become president.
No, they had to take him out.
He can't become president.
That's right. And so Bobby was speaking at a meeting there in the hotel. The quickest way and safest way to get out without having to shake hands with everybody was go out through the pantry.
Yep.
Or Maitre D was taking him through the pantry. The Maitre D felt somebody trying to get around to the right of him. He thought someone was trying to shake his hand, but it happened to be Sirhan. And all of a sudden, he pulled up a .22 caliber revolver and started shooting.
He has fired the shot. He still has the gun. The gun is pointed at me right at this moment. Take a hold of his thumb and break it if you have to. Get his thumb. They have the gun away from the man. In this shot, they've got the gun. I can't see.
There happened to be a fellow standing behind Bobby, hired as a security guard.
Yeah.
He happened to have a .22 revolver.
Yeah.
And he pulled it out and fired 4 shots that hit Bobby. One went through the padding on the right shoulder. One went under his armpit and came out his neck. Another one in the middle of his back. And the last shot was right behind his right ear. Yeah. And the barrel was an inch from his head.
Sure.
Now that was in the Thomas Noguchi coroner's report.
Sure.
And I have a copy of that report in the book, and it gives the angle of all the bullets where they were coming from the lower up toward the top. And
Well, the Sirhan surrender doesn't make sense. He was right in front of him.
He was always in front of him and never got closer than 5 feet from Bobby.
Yeah, and they found powder on the head, the
That's
skull.
right.
It was too close of a shot, and it was from behind.
And his name was Thane Eugene Cesar, the shooter.
I was in the entryway following the senator. He stopped and shook hands with several people and started to progress again. We were packed in there like sardines. There were lights and cameras and people and a lot of excitement. Senator just finished shaking hands with someone, and another man, I think it was the maitre d', walked up and took his hand. As we were slowly pushed forward, another man stepped out, and he shot. Just then the guard, who was standing behind Kennedy, took out his gun, and he fired also. I was told by the FBI, my own news people, that I was mistaken, that I was wrong. The senator was only shot twice.
Now, when you say your own news people, who do you mean?
Well, I was on the air with Jerry Dunphy. Also, I did a tape recording with Jeff Brent, and several people I told. In fact, I also told them that the guard pulled out the gun, and everyone told me that in the confusion, I didn't see what I saw.
Martin Luther King, how does he make your book?
J. Edgar Hoover's grandmother or great-grandmother was a black lady from Tennessee.
Oh, really?
And he detested his black blood, and that's the reason he hated Martin Luther King. When I published this book, I sent a copy to Coretta Scott King and to Caroline Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy Jr., and I didn't expect to hear from any of them. And about a month later, I got a call from Coretta Scott King's assistant.
Okay.
And he said, Coretta would like to buy a case of your books.
Oh, really?
And the reason was this is the only book that told the real truth about Martin Luther King. And I have a copy in the book of testimony at a Senate hearing where the FBI admitted in the meeting that they publicly tried to discredit Martin Luther King. They said that he slept with all the white women and black women that would come near him, and that he was a communist, and all sorts of bad rumors, and they were all promulgated by the FBI, and they admitted it in this Senate hearing. Her assistant said, "You're the only one to tell the truth, that her husband was a God-fearing man and never did any of that."
I've been locked up in this office and I haven't seen it, but I won't tell you how grateful I am and how worthy I'm going to try to be of all your hopes.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so happy to hear that, and I knew that you had just that great spirit, and you know you have our support and backing.
Well,
we know what a difficult period this is.
It's just an impossible period. We got a budget coming up. We got nothing to do with it. It's practically already made, and we got a civil rights bill and hadn't even passed the House, and it's November, and Hubert Humphrey told me yesterday everybody wanted to go home.
But I think one of the great tributes that we can pay in memory of President Kennedy is to try to enact some of the great progressive policies that he sought to initiate.
Well, I'm going to support them all, and you can count on that, and I'm going to do my best to get other men to do likewise, and I'll have to have y'all's help. I never needed it more than I do now.
Well, you know you have it, and just feel free to call on us for anything.
Thank you so much, Martin.
All right.
Call me when you... I sure will. Call me when you're down here next time.
I certainly will.
But let's get together, and any suggestions you got, bring them in.
Fine. I certainly will do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You were telling me a while ago that you'd actually talked to the man who accused of shooting.
Yeah, James Earl Ray. I went to a convention in Memphis and met James Earl Ray's brother, Jerry,
Okay.
at a meeting. And after the meeting was over, Jerry said, I need to go visit my brother in Nashville. Would you give me a ride? I said, sure. So I had James Ray captive for about 2 hours, and I was really pumping him.
Well, what about his brother? Did his brother mind you taking?
Well, he didn't know what was going on. He was just talking.
Okay.
So we got to Nashville at the president, and I requested a 1 hour meeting with James Earl Ray. Mm-hmm. He was dying of cancer of the liver. So I had a 1 hour meeting with him, and he said he was absolutely a patsy. It was all set up, and he went into great details about what happened and what did not happen.
Mm-hmm. And that's documented in your book?
That's in the book,
okay.
Yes. While I was there at this Memphis meeting, I became friends with a private investigator. He says, there's a fellow that nobody has even talked about, Leroy Aiken. Aiken went to Memphis 3 days after Martin Luther King killing, tried to find a job, and he got a job as a cab driver. He became friends with the owner of the cab company, Lloyd Jowers, a local mafia guy. They actually paired up on several killings in the Memphis area. At the time of the killing, Lloyd Jowers owned a Jim's Grill, which was across the street from the motel where King was staying. James Earl Ray was invited there by a fellow named Raoul. Raoul was actually a undercover FBI guy.
Right.
So he told James, we got a little gun deal going, and so I need you to go to the local gun store and buy a rifle with a scope on it. So James went and got his .243 caliber rifle. Raoul looked at it and he says, you idiots, this is wrong caliber, take it back and get a .30-06. Well, a .243 is just as deadly as a .30-06. So James went back to the gun store and traded it for a .30-06 and brought it back. So at the time of the shooting, Lloyd Jowers went out the back door of the kitchen. Martin Luther King came out and leaned over on the rail of the balcony. He shot him and then immediately came in, and as he walked in the door, his waitress was a black gal. She thought something blew up in the kitchen. She walked in there and he walked in the door and he says, get back up front, wait on the customers. And all this was told to me by Aiken. James, he was a small-time crook all of his life. At the time of the trial of James Earl Ray, the prosecution said that they knew where his father was and they were going to pick him up and put him back in prison if he didn't confess. And his attorney told him it's probably his best interest to go ahead and confess. And after all things settle down, I'll insist on a new trial and then I'll get you out. He did plead guilty and there was never a retrial. But he says I was pure patsy.
Wow. All I can do is thank you, and we appreciate you not being afraid of the people that don't want this information out. And
I name them all by name, and I give all the details.
And have you ever been sued over any of this stuff?
Nobody's ever called me and said that's a lie. Nobody's threatened me. Nothing.
Yeah. You must be doing something right, pal.
Well, I'm protected.
I appreciate it, and we hope you guys have enjoyed our series with Gaylon Ross, and we thank him for coming out, and we hope to hear more from you in the future. Thank you so much again for being on the show.
My pleasure.
And for all of those of you watching the show, thank you for being with us on the Converging Zone.
I speak to you this evening not only as your president, but as a fellow American that's shocked and dismayed as you are by the attempt on Senator Kennedy's life. Deeply disturbed, as I know you are, by lawlessness and violence in our country, of which this tragedy is the latest spectacular example.